What's up, guys? Let's talk about it. The best in slot. What is it in last Epoch for majority of players? Because there is technically very niche builds in the game that may want a specific stat. But for 99% of the player base, this is kind of what you're looking for. And what I mean by the base of the item is, let's take boots for example. If I was to look at the boots and go over all of the base of the boots, we're looking at what's called the implicit, which is the thing that's always going to roll. Like as in every single pair of Vanguard boots are always going to roll with increased armor. You're going to get movement speed as well as effect of ailment on you. You're always going to get some sort of a stat on the item. Now, some of these do have a level requirement, so don't expect all of these to drop as soon as you start in the game, but we're pretty much looking at the best in slot, so that's going to be more so towards the end game. I also wanted to add a little bit of a rule to this video, as in I'm going to tell you guys which one are the best. And we're mainly focusing in on the implicits, but I'll go over kind of a brief overview on what you're looking for on some of the slots in terms of like, what do you want to roll on it? Like with boots, you obviously want to get some movement speed on them, not only in its implicit, but also as a roll. So I'll go over that as well. And for the sake of the video, I'm not going to be going over exalted pieces of gear, and obviously, if you are going for the best of the best, everything will be exalted and you're going to have T7. But that's unrealistic for 99% of the player base. And I'm also going to remove out of the pool looking at something like the transient rest boots with like a very, very high rolls that you would have to slam into something that has legendary potential. And then you could slam like T7 in it. Yes, that's arguably the best in slot. But even though this video is titled for the best in slot in terms of your gear to min-max, it's unrealistic to get that in every single piece of gear, especially because you would have to hit it at like a 1 in 4 chance on a T7, which, again, most people that are watching this video to try to get more powerful, it's very, very, very rare to do it. But I will go ahead and say, yes, I understand that that would be arguably best in slot. Now, let's go over the pieces of gear that you're trying to look for in terms of like the rolls for, again, 90% of the player base. There are some niche builds that may not want some of these rolls, but for the most part, again, we're looking at the base of the item. For example, in boots over here, there are certain ones that may roll with some sort of like resistances, but in terms of the highest ones, like for the boots, just as a heads up, Solarium Greaves, as well as getting the Citadel boots for reduced bonus damage taken from crits, that's really good as well, and the Hiborian. Sometimes there's a kind of like a flex with these, but ideally for most builds, you're kind of looking at just trying to get resistances and movement speeds on all of your boots. Now, some of them may have higher rolls, and that's because, well, like hide boots are really low in terms of the level, and this doesn't have a class requirement. Some of these will have class requirements, and I'll go over kind of a little bit of a rule to that for every single class. But for the most part, again, some of these will just have like lower stats, and that's because the base, as in the base of the item, is just only going to have like a iron pair of greaves will never roll with over 35 armor, or will never roll with over 9% movement speed, because it doesn't exist in the base. You can get prefixes, suffixes that can change and add more stats, and you can get more movement speed and more armor, but the base of the item is important because it's kind of your foundation in what you're looking to get, so you can actually start crafting. So this is kind of the stuff that you're looking for. So for starters over here, this is what we're going to use as our little template. And again, I know that there are niche builds that can kind of modify some of these things where you may not need every single one of these pieces of gear. Again, depends on the build. We're going to be using Rogue sort of for this example, and I say sort of because I'm going to be mainly focusing it on the main stat. It's one of the most important stats in last Epoch, as a lot of the skills will scale with like dexterity, strength, attunement, whatever stat that you're needing for your character skills. That's what you want to focus in on. So that said, let's go ahead and actually get started with the generic ones. Now, there are going to be class-specific ones, and I'll go over all of them, but watch the entirety of this video. I promise it will make your life way easier when you're trying to build either a loot filter, or if you're trying to buy, sell, and trade, or if you're trying to get some target farming or looking for the bases when you are purchasing items from the vendor, or using any like the arena keys or any of these other like little endgame activities, so to speak. So I want to start off with the belt over here. One of the best in slots is going to be the Spider Silk one. And why is the Spider Silk one so good? Well, the base of it has poison and cold resist, and it's really high rolls, like in terms of resistances. Now, it doesn't drop until later in the game, but this is one of the best in slots. So what are you really looking for on the belt? So as far as the prefixes go, again, all the stuff that I'm talking about is going to be for like 90 to 99% of players. There are going to be rules and exceptions to maybe someone that's building something niche. But ideally, for the prefix, you want whatever damage type you're dealing, and then also getting some sort of mana regen. Getting resources is really good, so you don't have to spend your time waiting for your resources. This is a huge thing in last Epoch, to try to get your mana ideally to 30 in terms of like 30 resource per second. That way you're not having to kind of wait around, which is very important for your DPS. And then just getting HP is really, really good in the belt category. So yeah, Spider Silk is kind of like the best in slot. And then as far as the amulet goes, there's actually going to be multiple here. So we're looking for basically the implicit, again, that's going to be specifically the bone amulet as well as the gold. The reason why is these give resistances. Sure, there's other ones, like if you really need cast speed or whatever the case may be. Again, I'm just trying to focus in on like the main one that most people will want. Getting some sort of damage and getting extra resources is quite good, and getting mana regen is great, extra HP, or getting certain resistances are all great. Some of these are kind of flexible, and I'm going to mention kind of what is flexible here, but getting some of these stats is key, and you obviously want to be res capped in this game. It's very important. You also want to try to get crit avoidance, meaning that you're not going to be taking crit. So let's go into that next. So these are going to be in the glove category. So again, these ones, gold amulet, spider silk, and then for the bracers, the arcane bracers. Arcane bracers give you armor plus mana and mana regen. These are like by a long shot the best in terms of gloves. So what you can roll on gloves that's really important, that's a little bit different here, is specifically getting the reduced bonus damage taken from crits. Ideally, every single character, you want to try to get that stat in a couple places, so that way you just don't die. In last Epoch, sometimes it feels like you're not taking damage for an extended period of time, and then you just pop instantly. Well, it's either a boss one-shot mechanic a lot of times, or like multiple crits that are just one-shotting you, and that's what it feels like. Also, reading some of the modifiers is very key when you are actually playing in the end game, so read some of the modifiers, but yeah, this is going to help out immensely. And what you want to try to do is get mana, HP, resistances, as well as getting your character's main stat. That's one of the most important things across most builds, but you can see certain things may not roll that certain main stat, and that's why you're just going to get some sort of like resistances in a lot of categories, because, well, main stat is by far one of the most important things for most builds. Now, going into the rings, there's actually 2 rings that I can recommend. So getting sapphire rings are really good for the base because they give you mana and mana regen. Those are 2 key stats here that are really, really good. And then also opal rings. Opal rings will give you cooldown reduction as well as giving you all attributes. Again, we talked about all stats. So it's kind of flexible here, but getting mana regen is great, as well as getting dexterity. And then whatever source of defensive categories that you can get, whether that's resistances, dodge rating, health. Dodge can actually scale and actually help out with mana, and it also scales other things like glancing blows and stuff where you're getting a lot of dex. Again, your character's main stat, whether it's intelligence, dexterity, strength, that kind of stuff. You can also get as one of the prefixes. If you hold Alt also, it'll kind of tell you what's a prefix, what's a suffix, but prefix is mostly offensive. Again, don't skip out on the main stat on like every single thing. If you're playing Exploding Ballista, which is one of the coolest builds in the game, or playing a Falconer, which is really popular right now, yeah, you definitely want to try to get the main stat every single area that you can get. Which is, again, dexterity. And then for the boots, this is kind of one exception to this. I didn't really want to just say, like, okay, the best in slot is going to be a, like, legendary. These are actually pretty easy to get, but this, by a long shot, is one of the best items in the game. If I'm making, like, a best in slot video, I cannot say Warning Frost aren't one of the best pair of boots in the entire game for most builds. And why is it so good? There is no pair of boots in the entire game that will give you basically, I don't know, 60%, like, I'm not talking about like multiplicative damage, I'm talking about like base damage, as in this is 2/3 of my damage in most builds. And the reason why, it does have a huge downside, which is that you get negative cold and fizz res, but this works for spells and attacks, and that's why if you look at this game in min-maxing, most builds will be cold, because Morning Frost, there is no replacement for these. There's actually these pair of boots over here that are pretty insane too, but for the most part, these are like incredibly good, especially if you get multiple legendary potential and you start slamming other things on it. Morning Frost is so incredibly good because that base damage that you get is flat damage, which is not like percent increase. It is so incredibly good. Again, this is why some of the best builds will always be utilizing cold, is because these are just way too good. It's just absolutely amazing. But I will go over the actual like best in slot that's not a legendary here, but I have to include this one as a little note here. Now that we've kind of went over, like, these are all generic. The armor, chest piece and the helmet, as well as like this little offhand. It depends on the class that you're playing, and I'll go briefly over that real quick. So in the helmet category for the rogue, you're really looking at what's called the Scale Bane, and that's going to be because it's giving you poison and fire resistance. Again, you want a res cap in every action RPG, and Last Epoch is no exception. It's just like one of the best ones in terms of the base over here. Other options, like I really like how this one looks over here. It'd be like the Exile Hat, because you get some bow damage and you get throwing damage. This is like okay too, but for the most part, like what's giving you the best in slot, yeah, the Scale Bane is just incredibly good. Again, there are going to be some other ones where maybe cooldown could be great as well. If you're playing the Falconer build and you just want to spam like Dive Bomb as well as like the mobility skill, this is okay too. I'm going to go ahead and give that one a shout out. But for the most part, this is kind of like what you're looking for, because it's double res. Now, the chest piece over here, again, this is like specifically for rogue, but some of this information may apply. This one's so dang good because it gives you mana regen over here, and that is because it's going to be the Elite Regalia. So if I go to create, you can see, again, the base is the Elite Regalia, and it gives you endurance, mana regen, and it gives you some armor over there, and that's why it's really, really powerful. Now, the other slot over here, I guess, Quiver, I'll go over this one real quick. Well, the Ivory Quiver is really good because it gives you Fizz and Necrotic resistances. That's pretty dang big. But just as a rule on any of these, if you are already res capped, because these are like still arguably the best in slot, because you can get more offensive stats in other categories, like you want dex in every single one. That's like almost not replaceable. So it allows these other pieces of gear to kind of roll the other stats, if you will. But if you do happen to have like maximum physical and necrotic resistance, feel free to go ahead and pick out other things. This is just kind of a base guideline video because I can't go over what's the best in slot for, 1,000 builds. Like, I'm just going over generic kind of what is the best. But getting resistances on your offhand, shields are really good too, but that's almost, we can almost make another video going over that because glancing blow and block for rogue is actually pretty dang big. But ideally, just getting whatever flat damages that you can get, but you don't want to skip out on the dexterity. And then for like the little relic here, I do kind of like this increased crit strike chance, but it doesn't really matter. There's not really one that's super, super powerful on the rogue. So getting this is just 100% crit chance. That doesn't mean you actually just get 100% chance to crit. It's whatever your base crit is, and that can kind of change. But another thing I want to mention is if you don't reach the maximum resistances, getting an idol to have the resistances is definitely much better than losing out on, let's say, another defensive roll to have like a bunch of life, because sacrificing like 75 health to reach that extra 5 or whatever resistances to res cap yourself, it's much better just use an idol, because the difference between getting like 75 health versus like 12 health on like a small thing, or 8 health or whatever, it's going to be much more advantageous to just get the idol here. So if you need to min-max on resistances or whatever, try to go for idol and then get the roll on this. But that's what we're going to be looking at in terms of the best in slot. I didn't want to cover weapons, by the way, in this video because like they're so conditioned to the build. But for the most part, yeah, we could probably make a dedicated video to the best in slot in just covering the weapons. But that's going to have to be a separate video because this video is already going to be extensively long because I wanted to go over the best in slot. I did want to go over the bases of a lot of the classes here. So this one is for the Primalist. So Ancestral Garb is pretty good. Health CDR is a great stat. I really like Astrolabe. This is kind of technically generic, but it's really good for basically the Elementalist or Mage class, which we'll go into in a second. But Ancestral Garb is really, really powerful. And then for the boots that aren't unique over here, Citadel boots I went over. So Hiborian are really good, as well as the Solarium. Again, it's just going to be the best in slot because it gives you a massive amount of resistances. And then also Crusader Gauntlets gets a little shout out because it gives you a massive amount of void res on the implicit, which is amazing. And then Spirit Caller is really good because it's another double res. You can see there's kind of a theme here. It's just getting the double resistances versus like getting something else as like the base. Like you can get bleed on hit. It's like so small where you can get like 100 plus in other categories. Again, that's kind of why this video exists, is because certain other ones can just have way higher rolls, and resistances are key here. As far as the Rune Master over here, or technically I guess it's the Mage class here. As far as the helmet goes, oh, you know what? We didn't go over the helmet for this over here. So this one, it was kind of hard to pick like what helmet could be good because it's kind of class dependent, but getting some extra mana regen. Usually there's like some like low tier one, and then there's like an upgraded variant of whatever, the one that gives you like some sort of like mana regen. But there really isn't any one in particular that I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like absolutely best in slot. But Ice Wolf is pretty good, and then also the Great Wood Visage is good. Again, mana regen and mana is key. I would probably say Great Wood, but it depends on the build that you're playing with this, because there are some other like transformation builds with the Primalist that you don't really need the resources. So I want to go ahead and add that quick little thing over there. But next class over here, this is going to be, now we're getting to the Mage over here. So Ruin Visage is really good because you gain mana spent, gain as ward. That's like a barrier. It's really powerful. Arcane Regalia is really good. You get mana regen. Very, very good. Astrolabe is one of the best things because not only do you get a massive amount of int, which is good pretty much for all of the mage builds, but on top of that, you get the mana spent gain as ward and mana regen. It's just like so dang good. As far as like the relic over here, the warding scroll is really good. You get mana and mana spent as ward. That's really good. I already mentioned the Solarum Greaves already several times here. And then Transient is actually a really good pair of boots, so you can see that that's why I included it here. But again, Hiborian is good, Solarium is great as well. But this is going to be the Sentinel. So as far as the Sentinel goes, the helm, that's really good. Leonine Great Helm is insane. I mean, you get this plus one other thing, the reduced bonus damage taken from crits, you should be good to go. It's a massive amount of armor too, but that's what the class is all about. Getting mana regen is really good in most builds, because if you're sitting there doing 0 DPS, well, this is a huge source of extra DPS when you're able to spam your spender, so to speak, versus like a generator. So very, very powerful. And then for the offhand Argent Crest, again, another double res relic. The names are different, but the same concept applies. Argent Crest is really, really good. One of the best ones. Coven Robes is really good. And we're getting into the Acolyte. So yeah, Coven Robes is really, really powerful because it's going to give you, again, mana regen. And this one actually gives you cast speed too, so it can be kind of nice. Again, there are some niche ones because it depends on what you're playing. I'm kind of considering, I guess, like a Warlock or some sort of caster, where if you want to change the base, there are other things for minions that you can actually get if you are looking for that or you're looking to res cap. Immortal Regalia is actually pretty powerful as well. I mean, because you're getting that minion res and the all res, I mean, that's each one of these, if you get a high roll, right, that's 39 resistances in total on the implicit, which is really hard to beat out. Also, ward gain on kill is not a bad choice as well. There are a lot of niche things that can revolve around specifically getting leech, and there's like these low life builds. Again, these are where the video can get kind of crazy in terms of length if I was to go in this very niche build, but yeah, arguably for most builds, yeah, you want mana regen, you want cast speed. Coven Robes are just excellent. There really isn't something super good, but if you are playing something that can benefit off of curses, Curse Bones is excellent. It gives you resistance and just a massive bonus to damage. And then these are kind of the things that I wanted to mention for like kind of specific niche things. But for, again, 90 to 90%, 99% of players, these are kind of be the things that you look out for. Even if you don't want these yourself, like you're like, I'm playing a niche build, you can still pick up these as the base. I mean, Spider Silks are just like by a long shot. I mean, if we compare two resistances, and this is like, if we add them together, that's almost 100 resistances in total, right? If we were to change the base of like ward decay threshold, like again, or like just some movement speed, these are just night and day differences. But again, I understand there may be some niche build that you really want to get that extra armory or whatever the case may be. You really need I don't know, those extra potion slots, but for the most part, like the belts in general, like the Spider Silk is just miles ahead as a base type to go ahead and craft on, or pick it up so you can go list it to sell, or if you're making another build. These are like going to be the best things to look out for. But that's going to cover it. It's going to be the best in slot for, again, 90% of players. And stick around, guys, for the next video that I'll be dropping very soon. So if this is your first time here and you want to know the weapons, because I think that that's a very important one. But that one, it's going to require its own video, because this is where it gets kind of more niche. And we'll have to go into a little bit of theory crafting for builds. And I'll try to cover some of the more meta stuff. So again, if you're new here, hit subscribe and you will see it very soon. But take care. And let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below, or if you felt like I missed out on other good base types for other classes, definitely let me know down below to help out other fellow Last Epoch players. Anyways, take care. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.